Hello, folks. We're moving right along here. So, thus far, we have thought of the economy as one that does not trade with the rest of the world. That's what we call a so-called closed economy. What that really means is that we've sort of held in the background for now an element which has become more important, actually, in most countries around the world. It's trade in goods and services. What we'd like to call the trade balance or net exports, and also its financial relationship with the rest of the world, what we like to call international capital flows, which is actually, you'll see, is the flip side of that. So we're going to be expanding our analysis now to include what we call open economy considerations. Okay, so yes, it's time for open economy considerations that have previously been in the background to come to the center stage. So let's go back now to our identity that output is equal to consumption plus investment plus government plus exports minus imports. So now let's think about this. If we are selling more to our trading partners, all else equal, unless of course we are drawing down our inventories, which I'm just going to rule out for a second. If we are exporting more, then GDP goes up. But then we have to remember that in our domestic expenditures, we've incorporated some expenditures not only on domestic goods, but also on goods from our trading partners, imports. So we have to cancel those out. That may not sound all that intuitive. So let's think of a little example. Suppose that I'm planning on buying an extra $100 worth of chocolate, and once I may be having some personal problems, and once again we're forgetting about this idea of inventories. Domestic chocolate producers are not drawing down their stocks of chocolate. Instead, they're going to produce some more chocolate for me. Now, if it's all domestic, that means that's going to be $100 here and $100 in output. Okay, that's the case here. But let's suppose now I want to diversify in my consumption. I want to let's say half of my extra chocolate from abroad. Switzerland, maybe that's a good place for chocolates. In that case, imports would be rising by $50, and we'd have to account for an equal fall of GDP by that $50. Okay. So that's why the imports have a negative sign. Now, at this point, we also have to account for a key price. We have to keep in mind what we call the exchange rate. We're going to be starting off at least with the nominal exchange rate. That's the one we see in the newspapers. That's the one on the big sign at the currency exchange bureaus that say Swiss francs for US dollar. That means what? That means from a US perspective, a higher exchange rate means a more appreciated currency. So there is a critical piece of information here. Okay, suppose I am exporting something, some good or some service to Switzerland. I receive Swiss francs. I want to use those Swiss francs here in the United States. So what I'll do is I'll take those Swiss francs and I'll exchange right now about 1-to-1. But suppose that the dollar loses in value compared to the Swiss franc. Actually, as an exporter, that's good for me. Why? Because now I'll be earning more dollars per Swiss franc. So for whatever I'm selling in Switzerland. So as an exporter, I'm gaining in competitiveness, and I'm liable to put more of my efforts into Switzerland because I can get more dollars out of Swiss. Okay? But now let's change hats. On the import side, those Swiss chocolates that I've been enjoying have now become more expensive. So I'll probably switch out back into US chocolates. They're not so bad. So here we have the bottom line. For the exchange rate, we're talking about exports minus imports and an appreciation of the exchange rate. Now we're going the opposite direction. When the dollar becomes more valuable relative to the Swiss franc, that's going to actually discourage exports. Why? Because I'll be learning now fewer dollars for each Swiss franc, but it's going to make imports cheaper, so it's going to encourage imports. Okay. But now, in order to really get our international prices right, we're going to have to take a look a bit further beyond that nominal exchange rate. Prices in the US and Switzerland, they can change. For example, the price of chocolate in Swiss francs can rise. That's going to discourage my chocolate imports if the nominal exchange rate stays constant, okay, because now they're more expensive. By contrast, if the US dollar price of domestic chocolates increase and everything else is the same, including the exchange rate, I may as well shift towards my Swiss product. Okay, so that's why in order to get a comprehensive picture here, we need to have what we call the real exchange rate. The real exchange rate is a measure of the exchange rate that takes into account the two price levels of two countries. So now we're going to switch here, euro to dollar. Okay, the nominal exchange rate, euro dollar, but the real exchange rate is going to be the nominal exchange rate multiplied the ratio by the ratio of dollar prices to euro prices. And at the end of the day, that's the relevant exchange rate. Okay, now I said we're also going to be linking trade and finance. So let's suppose that we have a country that exports more than it imports. We're going to say that it runs a surplus on net exports, or sometimes we just call that a trade surplus. Now, in a very simple stylized economy, but one that's good enough for our analysis, when we run a surplus, we are spending less than we are earning. We're producing more than we are spending, which means that in a sense we're kind of saving, we're kind of providing some funding for the rest of the world. So we're lending in a sense, and we call that a net capital outflow. It's a net capital outflow. So by contrast, let's suppose that we are running a deficit. We could call that a net export deficit or a trade deficit. Now, once again, in this very simple economy, but realistic enough, in a sense, we are spending more than we are producing, which means that we need to borrow from the rest of the world. So we're kind of a deficit country. We're borrowing for the rest of the world. This means we talk about these as net capital inflows. Okay, so finally, we're going to be learning quite a bit about exchange rate policy, including the choice behind whether a country chooses to let the forces of supply and demand determine its exchange rate, what we call a flexible or floating exchange rate, or whether the country's central bank deliberately tries to circumvent that process by fixing the nominal. We'll find that they can't fix the real, but they can fix the nominal exchange rate. And you'll find out when a country does that, there have to be other supporting policies, other policies to complement that, including by the central bank. In fact, in our memo assessment, we will be looking at a real life case in the real world. China, which until recently kept its exchange rate, the yuan or the renminbi, RMB per dollar, basically fixed. Now, this has a lot of implications for China, including leaving itself open to accusations that it was what we call a currency manipulator, which, if that were true, that would have some adverse impacts in the United States. Well, okay, I've talked enough here. It's time to get busy, to learn about our open economy, to add those elements and the exchange rate and the capital flows. Think about those. You'll be doing that in your business. There really are very few businesses that are not internationally oriented, so you're going to get some good practice here, okay?